Hello and welcome everybody to the Educator Collaborative Gathering for fall of 2021. Had to think about that for a second. Yes, welcome. If you are here for my presentation that I am calling Writers Over Writing, 5 Ways to Center Students in Our Practice as Writing Teachers. Thank you for being here with me today. I know there are so many incredible educators and wonderful sessions to be had. So I hope you get a chance to see a lot of those as well. So again, hi. I think it's important always to start with a little bit about myself so that I can hold myself accountable to y'all. So please hold me accountable. I have been an educator for over 20 years, the majority of that time in the public school system. I have been a classroom teacher. I have been a literacy specialist and education consultant. I have worked with learners of all ages from K on up to mid 70s, and have learned so much from all of my students. So I'm really excited to share a little bit of what I've learned with you today. I'm also the author of 2 books from Stenhouse on teaching writing that you can find by going to my website or by checking me out on social media. And I am also a white cisgender woman. I am currently living on the ancestral homelands of the Abenaki people. They were forced off their homelands in the mid 1600s by European explorers, and yet they have ongoing cultural and spiritual connections to this land. And anytime I am able to do so, I want to support all Indigenous peoples and what they have taught me and continue to teach me on a daily basis. So there are a few ways that I want to share with you to do that. If you learn anything from me today, this is one of the ways that you can also give back. So one is by visiting the Indigenous New Hampshire Collaborative Collective, which is a mouthful, at indigenousnh.com. Their mission rests on 3 pedagogical pillars. 1 is public education, 2 is social activism, and 3 is local focus. The Mount Kearsarge Museum, which is in Warner, New Hampshire, a bit west of me, they serve as a living center for artistic expression and traditional values and contributions from both past and contemporary Native life. And I also try to give back whenever I can to the Land Back movement. Their main campaign right now is the closure of Mount Rushmore and the return of that land and all public lands in the Black Hills of South Dakota. So again, if you learn anything from me today, please consider giving back to any one of these 3 organizations or to one of our adopted charities at the Educator Collaborative Gathering. All right, so why writers over writing? Well, I think if you're here, you could probably answer that question just as well as I can, but this is just what my position is around why it's important to focus on writers over writing. One is, of course, that we teach humans and not products, although I have to be honest, when I first began teaching writing, I taught products. I taught forms and genres, and I didn't think as much about my student writers and what their needs and interests were. And so I think it's important for us as teachers to change our lens and to think about, you probably have heard the phrase, teach the writer, not the writing. Well, I do think there are moments where we should teach the writing. One of those moments might be if we are being held accountable to high stakes testing. I think that would be a moment when I would say, all right, look, everybody, I'm going to teach you how to do this so that you can perform well on this ridiculous test. To be quite honest, I think there are moments when you can teach certain forms and genres just kind of really, really super directly, and just talk about some of the reasons why it might be important or not important to play the game or to resist the game. But nevertheless, our work is not about creating perfect texts. It's about developing children and youth who believe they have something to say in the world, believe that there are real, authentic reasons to write, who feel confident engaging in the process of composition. And I think we should always be looking for progress and not perfection. As any of you who have written something for an authentic audience knows, it's I can't think of a time when I have put something out there that I thought was perfect, that I didn't want to change once eyes were laid on it. So progress, not perfection is one of my mantras. Um, I also think that focusing on writers over the writing is more culturally sustaining and inclusive. We want to always focus on the funds of knowledge that our students bring to the classroom, honor their ways of knowing, their lived experiences, their languages, their ways of communicating. And we can do that if we really focus on the writers over the writing. And then, of course, engagement, increase engagement. How can you not be engaged when your teachers are focusing on you as a person and not as much on products or assignments? So I think these are three really compelling reasons to kind of shift our lens from teaching the writing to teaching the writer. Um, and there are 5 ways that I have learned to do that. And so I'm going to share those with you today. Many of these you probably already do, but hopefully I'll give you some ideas that I've learned from other colleagues and from my own students. So number one first way to focus on writers over writing is by focusing on writers' identity. So thinking, for example, about our writers' strengths and their challenges. So inviting them to think about these things and to continually reflect on those throughout their time with you. So for example, just for me, one of my biggest strengths, I would say, is I have a lot of good ideas. A lot of things I want to write. But one of my challenges is following through without a lot of nudging. So that's definitely something that I'm continually working on, is making time to actually follow through with my ideas. Um, yeah, so I have a lot of other strengths and challenges as well, but think about what yours are as well and invite your students to think about theirs and to continually reflect upon those. Um, our processes and habits, they're not all the same. You know, we talk about writing process oftentimes as a series of steps. I know that that's what I did when I first started teaching because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. So we all pre-wrote together, we all drafted together, we all revised together. But I soon realized that that just wasn't how writing works and that everybody has different processes um, for different forms and genres, even. I know that for some of my writing, I need to draft it out first and then go back and sort of organize. Whereas for other kinds of writing that I do, I need to really plan it out, especially with comics, I would say. I really need to plan it out more. And you know, we all have different habits that are a part of our identities as writers. So really inviting students to look at those and to talk about those and share those, I think is important. And it can be a way for us to mentor each other in different processes and habits as well. Balance is another way to think about writing identity. So we really want our students to be well-rounded kinds of writers, right? We don't want them to only be good at a certain form or genre necessarily, just like professional gymnast. My oldest was a competitive gymnast for many years, so it's kind of, and with the Olympics having just occurred, it's sort of on my mind. But you know, her biggest strength and her greatest interest was on the bars event. But in order to be part of a team, she really needed to be able to do beams. She needed to be able to have a good vault routine, a floor routine. She really just needed to be a well-rounded gymnast. And I think for us as teachers, we want that well-roundedness. That doesn't mean that all students should have to learn how to write every single genre and form that there is, obviously, but we do want to be able to nudge them a little bit and kind of push the envelope a little bit with them and invite them to play with different forms and genres and ways of composing. And then, of course, interests. We always have students think about their interests as writers, but I also want us to think about the reciprocal processes of reading and writing. So, what are your interests as a reader as well? What kinds of forms in particular do you enjoy reading? And are those forms that you want to try writing? That's not necessarily the case, but it would be useful, I think, to think about the things that we gravitate to as readers and think about how we might play with those forms and genres as writers as well. The writer's identity. One of the things that I wanted to point out too is I have read this beautiful book. I think I read this last summer or last fall. Felicia Rose Chavez, who wrote the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop. Many of you might be familiar with this, but she talks in particular about the importance of decolonizing the classroom for our students of color. And so she writes, this is from an interview that she gave. She says it's important to have students be able to really see themselves, the emotional landscape around their writing practices and the habits they've developed. How do we, in fully seeing ourselves, begin to undo those habits, unpack that baggage, let it go for a while, and see how that feels? Now, again, she's really talking specifically about people of color and all of the ways that our dominant writing and teaching writing practices really sort of marginalize these students through the kinds of languages that we privilege, the kinds of forms and ways of storytelling that we privilege. So for her, identity is a really big piece of writing and of teaching writing. So there are a couple of resources that I just want to point out that are really useful, I think. Patty McGee has a book called Feedback That Moves Writers Forward. And I'm just going to click on one of the resources that she has, which I find really helpful. It's around writing identity, but what I really like about it is it's set up with this if-then kind of through this if-then organization. So if, for example, you write on your own time, but mostly keep it to yourself, like a diary or personal collection, then you might be the type of writer who uses writing to learn both about yourself and the world around you. So just helping to continue to develop that idea of writing identity and what that means. And then Pernille Rip has a nice who are you as a writer kind of reflection tool that she asked some of her older students to fill out that I think can be used as is or maybe modified to fit your needs and your students' needs and their developmental stage, that sort of thing. But it offers some ways to kind of reflect on when do you write best? When is writing hard? What is your favorite thing to write? What kind of writing do you do in your life? And so on and so forth. And then I love to mine author and illustrator interviews for that inevitable question about their habit and their habits and their processes as writers. I find that looking for those and what our favorite authors and illustrators say about their identities, their processes, their habits, their interests is always really, really useful and could be great sparks for discussion with our own students around their writing identities. So that's a little bit about writing identity. Two. So another way to center our students is to modify our why. And by this, I mean that perhaps one of the things that we might do is move from teaching genres and forms. So for example, I always had a poetry unit. I always had a personal narrative unit. I once had a children's picture book unit and so on and so forth. So moving from those kinds of units or balancing a little bit better so that we have some of those kinds of units, but also units that are centered around big inquiry questions. And I'll show you some examples of those and some of what I have done in the past. Or maybe we think about the reasons that we write in the world. If we were to ask um, a group of people, why do we write? Those reasons could be the frames for our units as well. And so just some, actually, I'm going to move through this real quick and come back to it. So just some examples. In terms of writing inquiry units and using big questions to sort of drive your units plan, these are some examples. So one could be, how do authors and illustrators get their ideas? This is a fantastic launch unit that I do, that we return to throughout the year. What are some ways to tell a story? What makes a poem a poem? So this is form-based. Poetry is a form of writing, but the inquiry is around what makes a poem. And you really discover a lot when you kind of flip it into a question and have students really think about those things that make something what it is. Another example is, how can I inform an audience about something important without completely boring them? Great inquiry question to explore. And this example right here is just a piece from a layout inquiry that my colleagues and I co-taught to first and second grade multi-age students. They were just really fascinated with the question about, how do authors and illustrators decide where to put their text and their illustrations on a page, and why? And that is all about layout. And so we were really able to not only lift the level of the writing that they were doing in their own books, they were playing with different ways to lay out text and illustration. They were fascinated with identifying it in the read alouds that they did. And so the engagement was super, super, super high. And, when I have the chance to visit those kids, they often still kind of talk about that. They'll be like, remember when? Because I used to come in and just sort of talk about the ways in which they were teaching me about layout. I would see what a student did, and I was like, I've never thought to do that before. That's amazing. Let's show your classmates what you're doing so they can be inspired by you. And so they were teaching each other. It was just really cool. And then back to thinking about the reasons why we write and using that as a frame for our writing units. You could, instead of having, say, a persuasive essay unit, you could have writing to persuade others. That could be your unit frame. Writing to inform others, writing to remember. What are some of the different ways that people write to remember? And what mentors can we use to show that? How do we write to make people laugh? What are some of the forms that are typically used for that purpose? What are some of the genres that are typically used for that purpose? And so just going back a little bit, often there's this confusion around form, genre, mode, medium, that sort of thing. I know it was confusing for me for a long time. And so one of the things I have here is, if you go to my website, to the blog, there's a blog post about this where you can find this infographic where I lay out sort of what the difference is between genre, form, and mode. And not everyone agrees with me on this. I'm going to be upfront about that. But the way I sort of have been able to categorize in my head, and that I think makes the most sense, is that modes are really the ways in which we're creating text. So the mode that we most often use in schools and classrooms is the alphabetic mode. So really thinking about writing in very traditional terms, words on paper or words on screen. But there are also ways that we compose using visual text, so pictures and illustrations and font and typeface. There are ways that we compose using oral text, writing for the ear. So when you think about podcasts and spoken word poetry and all that sort of thing. And there's others, including gestural and multimodal and spatial, even that you can kind of research on your own if that's something that interests you. But then forms and genres are often mixed up as well. We often talk about poetry as a genre when in fact it's a form of writing and the way that it's organized. That's what form is all about, is the way something is organized. So you have poems and you have essays and comics and podcasts and so on and so forth. Whereas genre is really the tone or the feel. So of course we have fiction and nonfiction, and then under those are subgenres. And these are all sort of fluid in a way. It doesn't, I didn't put this out there to necessarily box us into these ideas, but just to help us kind of consider what the difference is and to kind of combat some of the confusion that there is around them. Okay. So bringing us to mode, another way that you can focus on writers over writing is by incorporating more multimodality in your teaching. So these things matter. Different modes that we use in the world really matter. And multimodal composition is really, really something that is authentic and in the world. It's very rare that you look at anything nowadays without seeing more than one mode of composition. So there, especially anything online, you go to the New York Times and you see the alphabetic mode there, you see words and sentences and phrases, but you also see lots of visuals and you also see lots of spatial decisions that were made. So it's very authentic to the world. It's very engaging. I know from experience that many kids love to incorporate multimodality into their work, whether it's by exploring comics or exploring picture books or podcasts or digital stories, including videos, or public service announcements that include video and image. It's very culturally relevant. There are lots of different cultures that incorporate a lot of oral storytelling or gestural composition. Like I mentioned before, spoken word poetry is one of them. Oral storytelling is another, speech writing, that kind of thing. So it's very culturally relevant to incorporate more multimodality. And I talk a ton about this in my book, Writing Redefined. So if you want to kind of check out some of the synopses of that and to look at the study guide, you can get a lot better sense of what I mean by all this if this is new for you. And it's also much more inclusive because not everybody has the same strengths. There are a lot of students whose strength is not in creating alphabetic text, but they have incredible strength around creating visual text. And so offering the opportunity to bring in more than one mode of text is really, really something that I am very passionate about. And like I said, I've written a lot about this before, so you can kind of dig into some of that if you're interested. But I do think that that's part of centering our students and our writing pedagogy is by bringing in more multimodality. The reason why I say this is because if you think about writing as a series of intentional decisions that we make, with the exception of one, maybe two decisions, they're the same kinds of decisions, whether we are writing an essay, a traditional essay, or whether we are creating a comic. So maybe let's think about those two and think about the decisions that we make as writers. So we make decisions about content, what to include in our composition, craft choices. So what techniques are we going to use? Audience, who are we writing for? What is that tone going to be like? How is that going to affect our content that we include? How might it affect the form that we use? Our purposes for writing. Sometimes there's more than one purpose for writing something. Decisions around process, how we're going to go about this. What is our environment going to look like? I know that for me, there are certain environments that are conducive to me working on say my graduate response papers versus working on a comic or working on a tweet thread, right? So environment definitely matters and we make decisions around those. What materials we're going to use or what medium we're going to use, what form, what genre, what kind, and what mode. And mode is in bold here because that's really the one decision that is different depending on whether we're creating something that's more traditionally alphabetic, like a short story, or creating something that is multimodal or that has a different mode, like a wordless picture book, right? So other than that, and the kind of text we're going to be using, the decisions are all the same. And this includes motor planning. How we're going to are we gonna be lounging back in a chair with a notebook, or are we sitting up? Are we on the floor on our stomach? Kind of just sketching something out. These are all decisions that we make, and they're the same whether we're making, like I said, a comic, a zine, a meme, or a more traditional analytic essay, a poem, a short story. So incorporate more multimodality. I promise you it'll be not only super fun for your students, but also for you as well. Clearly, that's a passion of mine. Okay. The fourth way we can center our students in our writing, in our writing pedagogy, is to focus on the can-dos. Now, this sounds probably a little bit trite, but it is something that I have found that when I sort of help build that habit among my colleagues, when I have done so in the past, they have said that it is probably the most important professional learning that they've engaged in, is really thinking about um, how we can identify what students can do and what they already bring to the table and build off of these. And this goes for day one of kindergarten. What can they do? I learned from Lisa Cleveland to start from day one by inviting students to compose. And in kindergarten, for me, this often means just giving them blank books that I've stapled together and saying, we're going to make books today, because it's very rare in all of my years to have a student say, I don't know how to do that. They are excited to create. And from their first compositions, I can see what they can do. From talking with them and asking them about what they're doing, I can see right away what they can do. And this goes for children of all ages and learners of all ages. So really thinking about, what do you already see students can do, and how can we build off of those? So really nurturing that habit of looking for the can-dos. Um, and this relates to mentorship too, because many of us often use professional mentors in our teaching, right? Which I think is a great thing to do. We use our favorite authors and illustrators to teach certain things. But Lisa Eichholt wrote a wonderful book that really talks about the importance of student mentors. And this is something that I have also found in my practice, that students mentoring each other is incredibly engaging and it builds so much confidence. And I absolutely believe that every child has something to teach another child or another individual, including myself, about writing. And it might not be a craft move. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It could be that they have something to teach me or others about process. It could be that they have something to teach us about mindset. But every child has something, a gift that they can use to mentor another person. And looking for those and focusing on those is going to change your practice as a writing teacher. I guarantee you 100%. And it's really one of my favorite things to do. And one of my favorite ways to support my colleagues is really looking for those magical areas, those incredible things that kids already can do. Um, so that's the fourth thing. Um, and I often chart this work, depending on the age of the students that I'm working with. I chart it or document it if I'm working with older students in different ways. But one of the ways that you can see, there's a little photo of one that I did in a first and second grade multi-age classroom, is I simply chart it. So these are just examples. So you might notice that cat can really teach us about how to write an amazing first line of a composition. Mallet can teach us how to get into a writing headspace. I once had a student who every time it was time to write independently or collaboratively, it was just not my teaching time or not my colleagues' teaching time. She would ask if she could go over to a corner and pull the shade a little bit because she just felt that having that sort of that the decreased light stimulation was really important for her as a writer and to be able to think through what she wanted to do. And it was just so great because she always advocated for herself in that way. And so one of the things we asked her was, would you be willing to talk about your environment and what helps you as a writer? What kind of environment helps you? And she was able to mentor the entire class around advocating for that environment and getting into that writing headspace, which was really, really cool. Another example is you might have a student, Shanae, who can teach us about organizing thoughts before writing. There's just so many ways to document this, regardless of the age that you're working with, and just really use it to help lift the level of the work and the habits and the mindset of everybody in the classroom. But there's always something that one person can teach another person, even if it's not something the whole class might learn from, someone can always mentor someone else. And then the fifth way that I think we can really center our students and center writers over writing is through passion pieces. So you've heard the term passion projects and how teachers often take time to give students the opportunity to work on passion projects. But what about passion pieces? You know, we make time for what we value, and there are certain things that we really are so excited about that we're happy to work on them over a long period of time. And I'll share some of my own with you. But this could be one day a week, or if you go by class block schedules, a certain block a week. And really, one of the things that I would recommend is that we rotate this so it's not always the same time. Oftentimes, when I hear about teachers incorporating passion projects, it's usually on a Friday, right before a weekend. But I think that can send a message, certainly depending on the time and the day that we invite students to work on their passion pieces or passion projects. So really kind of thinking about ways we can rotate that time, or maybe it's a random sort of time, but there's always making time for students to work on passion pieces at a single or another point during the week, I think is really important. Um, and also, it's just a great way to celebrate what students are super into and, what are they excited about? What can they teach us about things that they're really passionate about? It's a way for them to really teach different modes and forms that they're kind of playing with. We can make this aspect of our writing classroom very low stakes. It can be something that they invite an audience to look at a certain point or not. This is a place where we can really encourage healthy risk taking around compositional practices and habits. It's a place where students can really work collaboratively on something, just like authors and illustrators often work together on certain pieces. This could be something, I can see students, and I've had students in the past work on a podcast together because taking on a podcast is a huge deal. For those of you who listen to podcasts, at the end of every podcast, they talk about all of the people who help make it happen. So it's just a great way to invite students to collaborate and really focus on something that is super important and engaging to them that might not be part of the curriculum per se. So just to share a couple of my passion pieces with you, I was working on in my notebook a riff off of Questlove, his piece, My Youth in 27 Records, that I think I first heard about on Penny Kittle. Sorry about my dog. And so I was working on that in my notebook, but then a couple of summers ago, I was teaching a graduate class on writing, and one of my students took that idea and did it in a digital way. So incorporated it using Padlet. And it was so cool that I had to just remix what I had already done and start it in Padlet. So that's something I love going back to every so often and working on. And another piece that I love is I just always wish that I had written this wonderful book by Amy Krause Rosenthal called Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life. And if you haven't seen it, oh my gosh, you have to get it. It's just sort of a memoir, but it's organized like an encyclopedia. It's multimodal, it's super fun, it's heartwarming, it's all the things. And it's just something that I always wish that I had written too. And so I love going back to that and just working on it a little bit at a time too. So passion pieces are important as well. Okay, so we're at that moment in the presentation where let's do just a little bit of reflecting. So thinking about these 5 ways that I presented for you today, 5 ways to center students over writing. So whether it's focusing on writer's identity, on modifying our why, how we frame certain units and lessons, incorporating more multimodality, focusing on what students can do and what they already bring to the table and building off of that, and incorporating time and space and opportunity for passion pieces. Of those 5 suggestions, because we have lots of other stuff to think about, what are you most likely to try or to focus on this year? What are you most inspired by? And then the other question is, how can I or how can we as your community of colleagues help? What are your needs around whatever you choose to focus on? What is it that we can do to help support you in this work? So just take a few seconds to think about that. You can pause this at that point so that we're not sitting here awkwardly together. But once you've had a chance to think about that, I would really invite you to share your answers to these questions. So you can use the hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering. You can tag me at Shawna Coppola. I would love to hear of these 5 things. What are you most excited to work on? Or what do you already do that you maybe have gained some ideas around that you want to continue to work on? Because I'm absolutely convinced that most of you are working on some of this and do some of these things already. And how can I help you? How can we help you as a community? All right, so that's it for me. So I just want to thank you so much again, like I said, for being here with me today. I know there are a ton of incredible offerings with you that I'm going to focus on and highlight in just a minute. But just if you want to connect at any time, you can check out my website at shawnacoppola.com. I'm also on social media. Generally, it's Shawna Coppola. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram and even TikTok. And I would love to connect with you there. But before you go today, please do not go without checking out some of the incredible sessions that there are today and some of the incredible educators who are here to offer you their expertise. And also, if you learned something from any of us today, please consider donating to our adopted charities. And I want to thank you again. And sorry about my dog. She is a nutcase. And thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.